most especially YouTube, because programs are put up right there. You can be in position to get to understand exactly what the term mindset is all about, because we say for each and every progress that we need to get as human beings, they always push us to get into the right mindset. Everyone is talking about the right kind of mindset, but how does a mindset develop? How do we determine a good mindset, and how do we define a working mindset, and how do you get our mindsets better? So that's why we decided to define all of them to ensure that we have a little bit of harmonious understanding, such that we can move forward as human beings, such that we can be progressive in our career, in our personal development, in our relationships, in our places of work, in our families, and each and every level of being as human beings. Why? Because we believe that one of the biggest gifts of nature that we do have as human beings is the human brain, and it is controlling most of the activities that we get involved in as human beings. So why not spare some time off and get to understand exactly how does this organ operate in one way or the other? So that's why we're like, okay, let's have a discussion about the different mindsets and how do we get to understand what we call the mindset. Yes, a recap such that we can be in a position to be in sync from what we started with. We started by defining the the biological structure of the brain. We talked about the different levels of the brain hemispheres, the brain neurons, and how each one of them operates. And then after defining what we call the biological structure of the brain, we went and started talking about what we call the mind. So we say the brain is the biological structure, and then what we call the mind is the work of the brain. So we say whatever the brain gets involved in, or whatever the brain does, is what we call the mind. And then still we moved forward and talked about what we call the conscious and the unconscious mind. So we say that the conscious part of our mind is almost 95%, and then the unconscious bit of our mind is, we say the conscious part is 5%, and then the unconscious part of our mind is almost 95%. So this is when we brought in some issues that were studied by a gentleman called Sigmund Freud, who came out and said that we have what we call the conscious part of it and then the unconscious part of it. We say the conscious part of our mind, that's where thinking takes place, the thinking, desire, dreams, targets, aspirations, they all take place at what we call the conscious bit of the mind. And then we talked about what we call the unconscious part of the mind. We say the unconscious part of our mind, that's where habits are, beliefs, philosophies, attitudes, habits. That's where we have what we call a full identity of a human being, and that's where it resides. It resides at what we call the subconscious part of our mind. Then still, after that, we talked about how does information get into our brain. We say the information gets into our brain using what we call the senses. So we had to talk about what we call the sensory perception and the extrasensory perception. We said what we call a sensory perception is about how we perceive using the senses, the tasting using of the tongue, the sight using the eyes, the feeling using the skin or the arms, the smelling using the nose, and the hearing using the ears. So we say that's how we perceive. That's how we take in information. And we said all the information that is taken from outside using the senses or human senses, that is what we call perception. So we said all the senses work so hard to ensure that human beings get what we call a serious form of perception. Or that's why you call it sensory perception. Why? Because information goes to the brain through the senses. Like we've said, sight using the eyes, tasting using the tongue, smelling using the nose, hearing using the ears, and maybe touching or feeling using our skin. And then we also talked about what we call the extrasensory perception. We said in extrasensory perception, what we mean by that, we are talking about some other forms of information that we take in as human beings that is beyond our 5 senses or 6 senses. And then we said some of the forms of extrasensory perception. We talked about precognition. We said the precognition is when you think about something before it happens, and then after you influence your mind to make it happen. That's what we call precognition. And then from there we talked about what we call retrocognition. Like retrocognition is when something happens and then after some time you think about how you experienced it before. That's what we call retrospection, which is the opposite of precognition, right? We have what we call retrocognition and retrocognition. Precognition is before, retrocognition is after. Then we also talked about what we also went ahead and talked about what we call clairvoyancy. We talked about telekinesis or telepathy. We talked about other forms of extrasensory perception. Then we also talked about brain waves. We said that the brain takes in information using what we call the waves, the gamma waves, the beta waves, the theta waves, the alpha waves, the delta waves, and how information is taken in and how each and every level of waves influences us as human beings. And then we also talked about what we call brain hemispheres. We said the brain is divided into two hemispheres. That is what we call the right side of the brain, which is too much of an animal part of the brain. And then we also talked about what we call the left side of the brain, which is too much of the human part of the brain that so much engages in what we call thinking and taking in data. It's data driven. We said women in most cases, most of them use so much of the right side of the brain. Then men in most cases, they use more of the left side of the brain. We say that in between the brain we have what we call the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is what the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and then the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And then from there, we talked about last week, we talked about what we call how the brain protects itself from danger. We said the brain protects itself from danger using three major ways. Number one, we talked about the 4 measures of classical thinking, or the 3 levels of classical thinking, and we broke them down. Actually, there are 4. And then we also talked about what we call mental biases, a little bit of mental biases. And then we also talked about what we call defense mechanisms, which is where we are going to pick the conversation from and move forward from right there. But before we do that, I just want to remind you that the program is called Vision Voice. It runs every Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. and your host is me, Dr. Semao Charles Cake. Now, we said even last week, we also talked about what we called the levels of the brain, and we said the brain has 3 levels. The uppermost part of the human brain is called the neocortex or a frontal lobe, and we said that is the executive center, or the where thinking and all executive decisions take place. It is 40% of the entire human brain. We said it's almost 20% endorphins, because dolphins have a little bit of a developed brain like that one of human beings. And then we said it is also 17% in apes. Apes have a little bit of a developed neocortex. We said it is 15% in apes, or between 15 and 17% in apes. We said it is 7% in dogs, and 3% in cats. So that's why we say that a cat is almost a wild animal. That's why it can harm even babies, because it's not close to human beings. What makes a dog a little bit very human in terms of our experiences, and we term it so much known as man's best friend. It's because of that level. Though dogs have a little bit of a more sensory perception, most especially when it comes to the nose. When it comes to using what called the olfactory or sensing using the nose, a dog beats a human being by 600 times. When it comes to the capacity of using a nose, yes, we might be a little bit better when it comes to getting empowered as human beings, when it comes to using other senses, or we might be having a bigger neocortex. But when it comes to olfactory, in other words, perceiving or taking in information using what we call the nose, the dog beats a human being by 600 times. That's why dogs can pick all senses, all smells and scents that you can't really imagine to experience as a human being. Why? Because it has that innate ability, it has that inbuilt system that enables it. A dog actually relates to an elephant, because an elephant is the biggest animal, the biggest mammal that has a little bit of the highest sense of olfactory perception. In other words, the nose of the elephant is a little bit very, very, very advanced when it comes to smelling or picking a little bit of scents through the nose. So we talked about the neocortex, we said, which is a little bit of the executive part of the brain, and we said all the mental activities that are very deliberate, they are taken over by the neocortex. And then from there, we talked about what we call the chemical brain, the the emotional brain or the chemical brain, which is a little bit in the center of the brain. And then we say that is the seat of our emotions as human beings. We say the emotions like love, fear, stress, anxiety, excitement, worry, disappointment, panicking, frustrations, ecstasy, bliss, envy, jealousy, like all, you can mention all those emotions. They sit in the middle part of the brain or in the second level of the brain, which we call the chemical brain or the emotional brain. We said the neocortex is bigger in men than in women. And we say the chemical brain or the emotional brain is bigger in women than in men. And then we said that the topmost, the bottom, the bottom of the brain is what we call the reptilian type of the brain. So we said the reptilian brain is what controls the respiratory system of a human being. So that's why it's a little bit easier for you to breathe even when you're not conscious. In other words, even when you go to bed, you can go ahead and breathe in and out. Why? Because you don't have powers. The activity of breathing in and out, the respiration, the inhalation and exhalation, they are not activities that we have in a reach. We don't have them in our reach. Why? Because they are controlled by the lowermost part of the brain, what we call the reptilian brain. Now, because it controls the respiration, breathing in and out, it also controls all other body activities, including excretion and also other activities like digestion and other activities like locomotion. In other words, when you learn how to walk, you cannot forget to learn how to walk, including when some parts of your brain have been removed. Why? Because that activity is controlled by what we call the reptilian part of the brain. Maybe when someone has a little bit of a mental disorder, like some of the mental disorders that disturb movement or locomotion, one of them is called catatonia. Catatonia. If someone has a little bit of catatonia, it becomes a little bit hard for them. Other mental disorders we shall talk about maybe in the next, we shall talk about them as well, like bipolar, schizophrenia, there is a little bit of a young man from St. Maria Goit Katende who is a little bit making rounds. I don't know if you've been in position to follow him. He is a little bit of one of the cases that we can talk about maybe in the near future. We can also talk about the mental disorders, such that because mental disorders also affect our perception. So we said perception is the sensory information, is the process of taking in information using our senses, 5 senses, and then the process of making sense out of the information that you processed. That process is called cognition, or that process is called conception. So perception is taking in information. Conception is making sense out of the data, out of the information a human being has captured from a given, using a given kind of sense, and that information, when it gets to the brain, the process of breaking it down to see if that information makes sense to the human experience, that process is what we refer to as conception. Then we talked about mental biases, and we said that mental biases are defense mechanisms and four means of classical thinking. That's how the human brain protects itself from danger. And last Sunday we talked about the 4 of them. We said at the first door, each and every time the brain experiences pain, it closes the first door. And how does it close the first door? It closes the first door through what we call sleeping. And we say the role of the human brain was never designed to make you successful. The human brain was never designed to help you go where you want to get. No, the human brain was designed to help you survive. The human brain was designed to help you get protected. The human being is very selfish. Actually, the major role of the human brain is to conserve energy. The brain has to ensure that using all possible means, it conserves the energy that is being distributed appropriately. We say the airtime or the energy of the body that we are referring to is that ADP that is broken down into the ATP. In other words, it's the adenosine diphosphate that's broken down to what we call adenosine triphosphate. From the ADP to the ATP, that's what we call the airtime of the body, which is very, very much connected to what we call the reward centers. We say that each and every activity the brain engages in with ease or at ease, your brain releases what we call the neurotransmitters. And all these neurotransmitters, most of them are connected to what we call the reward system. Now, the reward system of a human being is very, very similar even to so many reward systems of even so many reptiles and so many other amphibians. In other words, what rewards, if you look at the, one of the biggest neurotransmitters, we can talk about maybe serotonin, but we so much want to focus more on what you call the dopamine. Now, dopamine is one of the biggest neurotransmitters, and we said each and every time you do something that you consider powerful, you do something that you consider exciting, you do something that you consider entertaining, your body is going to get rewarded, or your brain is going to get rewarded. How does it get rewarded? It gets rewarded by releasing the dopamine. The dopamine is what rewards the body to ensure that you get a little bit of a good feeling, right? And we give an example, specifically, that dopamine in most cases is released through, is released when a human being experiences two things. Number one, when you eat food, natural food, when you eat food, natural food, and also when you engage in sex. Now, it's because of the dopamine release that human beings have resorted to eating a lot of sugar-coated foods. Most of these foods are produced by industries. Most of these foods that we're talking about are produced by industries. Actually, one of the biggest causes of the mental disorders, of mental health, I'm speaking about this because this is what we call the mental health, the mental health month of the men. I think next Sunday we shall talk about the mental health in men. It's like that we get to understand exactly how does a brain of a man gets affected, because it is still all under the mindset series that we chose to do. And I'm emphasizing that just in case you've missed out on these programs, you can again catch up the program that we did, the previous programs that we've done, such that you can, sync, you can get into synchrony, or we can move together at the same level of understanding and at the same level of discussion. We are still defining what you call the mindset of a human being and how does it get formed, how does it get developed. So we said, I was trying to emphasize that even the so-called mental disorders are also part of what we call a mindset. Yes, just because someone's mind is not maybe appropriate to the standards, that doesn't mean that they don't have a mindset. They have a mindset that is a little bit maybe working in some other way. So that's why I was trying to define maybe some instances like bipolar. We shall talk about bipolar. We shall talk about catatonia. We shall talk about autism. Autism is one of the biggest. And I was saying that most of these disorders that we are talking about right now, they are so much brought about by poor food. They are so much brought about by what we call poor food. Why? Because most of the foods that we take in right now, they are sugar-coated. And I remember emphasizing that each and every time you put in food, each and every time you put food in your system, your body or your brain is going to it gets commanded to release what we call dopamine. And the moment dopamine is released, your body is going to get rewarded. How does the body get rewarded? The body gets rewarded by the body gets rewarded by feeling good. So the reward center of human beings is so much taken care of by what you call dopamine, one of the most strongest neurotransmitters. So each and every time you eat something that is sweetening, something that appears or tastes sweet at various levels, we consider that a little bit of a sweetener that's going to get your body release a lot of neurotransmitters, and then you're going to have an interpretation that this is sweet. This is very wonderful. We say the second way neurotransmitters can be released is when a human being is engaging in a sex activity, or when he is engaging in sexual intercourse. Allow me not to break it down a little bit more than that, because I don't know who's watching. Maybe you can have a version one time when we talk about how these neurotransmitters are released when serious mature people are engaging in the activities of what we call reproduction or procreation or co-creation. Yeah, so we say that when the brain experiences what we call danger, the brain is always going to look for ways of protecting itself. And we say when the brain experiences danger, what the brain considers dangerous, what the brain considers cancerous, it's something that it has never experienced before. If my brain has ever looked into this camera before, each and every time I come into this camera, I may not have the same fear like someone that has never looked into this camera for the first time. Just because you've not done something before, it puts your body a little bit at stake, and it makes it hard for you as a human being, for your body to get involved or to get engaged, to get composed towards attainment or execution of that very activity as a human being. So that's why in most cases, the brain will also look at it as a form of pain. And we give an example that probably when someone is being informed, maybe they've lost a relative, and maybe someone is telling them that maybe so and so has passed on. In most cases, they also pass out. That human being who's receiving that information, they also pass out. They pass out not because they don't know what to do. They pass out just because the brain has never had that person talking about or experiencing the death of a beloved one. If you've never lost your mom and if you never lost your dad, I'm just using this as a very funny example, but it's not so funny. If you've never lost any of your relative, and probably you didn't expect them to die at that particular time, when someone comes and lets you know that your so and so has died, the mama has died, dad has died, your body cannot process that information very right. You know what the brain is going to do? The brain is going to cut you off. The brain is going to cut you off from the reality that you're experiencing right then. And the reality that you're experiencing right then is to cut off the eyes. Why do you cut off the eyes? Why do you choose to collapse? Why do you choose to faint? We say it's because 80% of the information that we receive as human beings go through the human eye. So the moment the sight is cut off, that is almost 80% of information that you would perceive as a human being eliminated. In other words, the brain is going to appear like it's malfunctioning. So the collapse or the fainting, that's the first door. The first door the brain uses to protect itself from danger. That is the first door. We call it sleeping. The brain closes the eyes. So sleeping can be closing the eyes. Sleeping can be collapsing. Sleeping can be fainting. But we collapse, we faint, or we choose to sleep deliberately because we cannot deal with the pain that we're experiencing at that time. The brain doesn't have a right kind of approach to process and come up with the truth from that very painful experience you're experiencing at that particular time. So what the brain chooses to do is to lock off, or is to shut off. When it shuts off completely and then perception goes off, that person collapses. That is the first door the brain uses to protect itself from danger. That's the first one we talked about. And then the second one we talked about is, we said the second door is what we call anger. Anger or madness or cognitive dissonance. Now, we say that most of the people that you see moving on the streets, most of the people that we take for rehab, most of the people that you see a little bit, disturbed on the streets, mentally not okay on the streets, they are not operating like that because they are not okay. They are not operating like that because of something. They are operating like that probably because they came into an interaction with an environment or with an experience that they couldn't get experience to. That's why when you've been so much a little bit connected to so many people that work with the military, one of the biggest challenges that they have, the military officers, most of them that serve for long in the army, they get a little bit of mental disorders. And one of them is getting mad. Now, I don't know if you've ever been close to you. I don't know if you know what it means to live in an environment where 10 people have been killed by you, 5 people have been killed by you, 15 people have been killed by you. Yes, with the training, these soldiers can be in a position to learn, to live, or to move, irrespectiveness of the pains that they experience at various levels rather. But most of them cannot contain. That's why most of the people that get serious mental breakdowns and they get off, most of them are military serving officers. But because there is a lot of training, and there is a lot of medication. The medication that we use, or that they use, in the military, it's not almost what we use to the civilian bodies. Like for instance, a civilian, you can be told to take Panadol 2 times 3 in most cases, but a soldier can be ordered or prescribed to take 5 times 1. the same medication that you take as a civilian. Why? Because their bodies are operating at a given level, not like yours, you know, because they are trained, their bodies are fed on something else, and they are mentally a little bit on another level. So to help you contain, or to help them contain the kind of pain they experience, even the kind of treatment that is given to them, it's not the same kind of treatment that we give to civilians like me or like you is watching me. Now that's the second door. We said the second door is getting mad, insanity, akazole. I was emphasizing that most of the people that you see on the streets, abantu bola babasinga nga bafunamu ekikyamu ku bwongo, baba bafuna experience oba baba batuuka mu mbeera gye batasobola kunnyonnyola. Example, ddayo waka n'osanga mukyalawo ng'assa abaana bo, oba n'osanga mukyalawo ng'alina houseboy, oba n'osanga mukyalawo oba muwalawo ng'ali ne mukulu we. You know, those kind of experiences zilemesa obwongo ki processing lwa nsonga gw'obalabanga baana n'ate bubeerabanga baagalwa. When the brain fails to process that information very right, some of the door closes. Some of the door close like deliberately. They close such that they can help you find a way to deal with that reality. So when you see people getting mad, when you see people having issues in the processing of the relative information that is required in a given environment, that could be probably they went through a terrible experience at a given time. So that is the second door. The second door is getting mad. And then the third door is forgetting. Most people that experience dangerous experiences, they choose to forget them. In other words, human beings, we are very forgetful. There are things that we forget. But any painful experience, because you know how the body experiences it, most human beings prefer not to have that experience again. Not because the pain is not there, but they prefer to bury it down in the subconscious such that they don't feel that pain again. So they choose to forget. That's why people or someone can say, tonzijukiza mbwa ya musajja, tonzijukiza mbwa ya mukazi. Why? Because the experience they had with that person was very, very painful. And each and every time they replay it. Now, we said something last week as well. And we said that your brain does not know what you experienced yesterday and what you're experiencing now. Your brain does not know what you are going to experience tomorrow and what you're experiencing yesterday. Actually, one of the biggest problems that the human mind has is a vivid sense of memory and a fantastic sense of imagination. Why? Because of the size of the neocortex. Now, a human being is the only creature that can imagine how the future can be in 10 years, and you create it. That is what we call a dream. Maybe we shall talk about that as well. So imagination is when you think in terms of images, but you think in the future. Now, that is because of the size of the neocortex. Most mammals cannot imagine. There is so much you want to thrive. That's why they so much operate out of instincts and out of intuition. They so much operate out of instincts and intuition. But a human being can project and we say Uganda 2040 or Vision 2040. That's where we are headed. Why? Because we have the ability, because of the super developed human brain, we can develop something, we can develop a journey, we can develop a plan, we can develop a trajectory, a framework that can help us get there in a near future. We can even project as early as 2050. Why? Because of the size of the neocortex. Now, we don't only have the ability to project, we also have the ability to remember vividly what happened in the past. Like, for instance, any experiences that you get past 5 years, you can remember that very experience. That's why we talked about last time that most especially the females, they have a very terrible, it's very hard for them to forget someone that they first slept with. It's not easy. Why? Because that experience is very painful and that experience is very, very emotional. They don't so much forget. So we say that the second door is what the human brain uses to close. And we call that, the third door, we call that forgetting. Most especially when the experience was very painful. Because each and every time you remember a painful experience, your body is going to respond right away, like you're experiencing it right now. Like, for instance, you meet someone that hurt you in primary 4. You meet someone that beat you. You meet your teacher that used to beat you in primary because of the poor handwriting. Now, your brain is going to replay that very pain like the pain, like you're feeling it right then. You're going to experience the same pain, like you're having that pain, like you're experiencing it in that real time. Yet this is experience that you had 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Why? So like I've said, the human brain has what you call a vivid sense of memory and a fantastic sense of imagination. Why? Because of the neocortex. Now it's because of that when the brain is experiencing something painful, the way it protects itself from that danger is by forcefully forgetting it. That's why most people don't want to have dates. They don't want to recall dates or specific events that may be where they had their breakups, that may be when they lost their beloved ones. Whenever each and every day comes, like for instance, I lost my dad on the 23rd of June. Now each and every time that day comes, man, I feel it like it's real time. I remember everything like it was. I lost my grandfather, November 2009. My grandfather. But each and every time I get November, I remember vividly each and everything that I experienced right there, right? And the pain that I felt then, I feel it in real time. Now, because of that, the brain chooses to take out that information from the working memory, or what you call from the short-term memory, and bury it down away from what we call the subconscious part of the mind. So that is the third door. Forgetting or forcing yourself to forget, forcing yourself not to recall a painful experience, that is not you. No, that is your brain. That is your mind at work, because you don't want to interact with the pain like you experience at that particular time. Now that is the third door. Just in case you missed out on this, I'm just doing a recap. You can check it out on our YouTube channel, TV1 Uganda on YouTube, and follow all these classes like we started 2-3 Sundays ago. Now the last door, which is the fourth door, is death. So we said the first door is sleeping or closing the eyes. Why? 80% the eyes are shut off. The second door, we say it is getting mad, insanity, kazole. Wogwamu akazole, wesulamu akazole akambayaya, because obwongo tebusobola containing amazima gayitawo akaseera ako. So nogamba kangwe dalu siri ku ebyo, but it's mental, right? And then the third door that we just talked about is forgetting. Buli kintu kye wali oyiseemu nga kikulumya toyagala kukijjukira, so weefuula akyerabidde. But because of some things kitera okuvaayo, tujja kwogera lwaki ebintu ebyo bivaayo ate imaani ebitukosa oba ne bikosa abantu abalala. That's why it is a little bit hard for people to forget. Omuntu bamukyawa, then they move into another relationship, they start behaving like they are still in the past relationship. We shall also talk about how all this mindset affects our relationships. But I was talking about the very final door, which is the fourth door. The fourth door is called death. Now, when the human brain gets into an experience that it cannot force itself to sleep, that cannot force itself to get mad, when you go beyond forgetting, the last door the human brain closes is death. And we say, not so many people die of diseases. Not so many people die because they were decided to die. So many people die because they have failed to process the experience mentally that they're experiencing right away. That their brain cannot contain the kind of pressure the brain is experiencing. The brain cannot experience the kind of pain that the human being is experiencing at that particular time. So the best solution can be or could be to choose to die. Now, most of the people that you see that lose their lives, they don't die because they maybe don't have access to treatment. No, they die because the brain cannot contain that kind of experience, so it chooses to automatically close all the first three doors and the last door. That's when someone is declared clinically dead. So those are the four doors we talked about last Sunday, and we said we are just talking about how the brain or how the human mind protects itself from danger. I want to emphasize, we say the role of the human brain is not to protect you. It's not to help you go forward. The role of the human brain is not to help you become rich. No. The role of the human brain is to help you be safe. Safety, protection, energy conservation are the major roles of the human brain. Therefore, anything that involves the consumption of the human brain, the brain is going to refrain. the neurons are going to shrink. Learning is not going to take place. Therefore, experiences are not going to take place. It's better for brain to refrain itself from interacting with that very source of pain so that it can find a way to protect itself from that painful, dangerous experience. Yeah, that's a recap of the 4 programs that we've done. This program is called the Vision Voice. It airs every Sunday from 1 to 2. Your host is Dr. Semao Charles Cake. And I'm emphasizing, just in case you missed any of these episodes, you can look it up on our YouTube channel and get to understand exactly what we are talking about right here. So after talking about how the brain protects itself from danger using the 4 doors, the sleeping, the madness, the forgetting, and the death, today let's talk about what we call mental biases. And I want to make it a little bit clear. Most of the things that we do, our brain is protecting us. And by the end of this program, probably, I'll give an example of 5 or 6 mental biases that will make it a little bit easier for us to understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the mental biases, like I've said, the role of the human brain is to come into what we call an energy shortcut. Instead of using 100 maybe calories, instead of using maybe burning a lot of calories, the brain taking a lot of oxygen, because we said oxygen is the food of the brain. When the brain doesn't have access to oxygen, it is almost dead. Why? Because almost 40% of the human brain is calories. These are proteins, you know. Masavu, bongo wa masavu. Therefore, that's why when you're a little bit very stressed, your brain is using almost 30% of the entire oxygen that you're taking in. That's why we will stress why? Because all the energy that you're taking in, that is oxygen, is used up by the brain to help you get out of that source of stress. So let's talk about cognitive biases. Now, I've just said that the role of the human brain is to protect you from danger, right? How does the brain does that? It gets it done by closing the 4 doors we've just talked about: sleeping, madness, forgetfulness, and death. Those are 4 ways of classical thinking. But let's talk about now biases. What are biases? A bias is a thought process. In other words, whenever you don't process information right, your mind is going to experience what you call a bias. And let's get some examples of biases. Probably it will get a little bit easier for you to understand what I'm trying to talk about here. Now, one of the biases that we can talk about is what we call the halo effect. Halo effect. Halo effect is H-A-L-O effect. Halo effect. Now, halo effect is something that is very simple. Halo effect is when you look at something positive. When you see something positive in a human experience, when you see something positive in humans, we always tend to think that that thing is only positive. In other words, when you see a beautiful woman, in most cases, we consider all the positive attributes. We consider that this woman has all the positive attributes in them. When you see them beautiful, in most cases, we consider that they have all beautiful things. I was going to give a very funny example. Just remember that, you know. But let me give you an example. When someone appears to you and they've dressed smart, they look so good, they smell so good, they put on a tie and a suit, they are looking so good, maybe their hair is trimmed very well, and maybe they are driving in a very posh car, and they get out and they are handsome and they are beautiful, right? Now, because our brain doesn't have a lot of energy to process the experiences, to process the interpretation, to get the cognitive interpretation of what that means, the brain's got to say, onono omusajja afaanana bulungi, aleka musajja mwesigwa, alina amazima, afaanana bulungi, mwesigwa, alina amazima, talimba, atalabika alina ne ssente. Now, all these games are played up by the human brain. You understand? All these are played up by the human brain. That is what we call the halo effect. In other words, when you see something positive in someone, in most cases, we tend to attribute all other positive things to that specific person. The opposite is also right. When someone sees something negative in you, they tend to consider that each and everything that you have is negative. That is the opposite of the halo effect. So the halo effect is one of the best biases that we so much interact with. Now, how does this get into play? This one gets into play most especially when it comes to people in media, and also when it comes to celebrities, and also when it comes to marketing. Now, most people admire musicians, most people admire footballers, most people admire basketballers, and most people admire Hollywood stars, including myself. We get them admired, or we admire them that much, not knowing the real experience of who they are as individuals, right? Probably when you see Denzel Washington moving around with the wife, Pauletta, you might think that these guys don't have problems at home. Like, for real. I will give you an example. Sorry, just mention this example because it's public knowledge. When you look at the relationship between Shakib and Zari, because Zari is a very beautiful woman, Shakib is a very handsome young man, you would probably believe that these people don't have problems. Why? Because of the positivity, the little positivity that you see in them. Each and every time they come out with good pictures, family photos, they look good, drive good cars, put on designer labels, like they are really cute, right? So you would think that maybe Shakib or Zari are the most, respected people in that very angle. But you're just looking at them using their images. You've not had any interaction with them at any given time. So that's why one of the biggest trademarks or trade lines that we ever had, it was someone that was promoting some kind of jelly. He said, "Endabikayo chekitiwacho." They eat the endabikayo, like how you appear. People give you a little bit of dignity. People hail you in a little bit of a bigger position because of how you appear. Each and every time you go for an interview, you look a little bit nasty. You don't look smart. You don't pronounce good. You have your papers from a very fake university. Probably someone has never heard of. Someone is not going to give you the right kind of attention. Not because you don't need it, not because you are not supposed to get it, but because they have a bias. Now that's what we call a halo effect. Like, for instance, when someone says, back in the days, I don't know how far true that is. I mean, this is still now, but back in the days, I think the last 15, 20 years, each and every time someone would present a document from Makerere University, not so many people would say no to that person, irrespectiveness of other universities, right? Because of the level and the magnitude and the level of perception, the level of respect people used to accord. People used to so much give out to Makerere University. So just present a paper from Makerere University, no one asks, right? Because all the positive attributes had been put to Makerere University, a university that's established in 1920. Come on, it has produced all the best. Why? Almost all African presidents. That was the time Makerere University had almost 7 African presidents, from Uganda to Tanzania to Malawi to Zambia to what? Most of those people decided from Makerere University, right? So if you look at that, you might think that whoever goes to Makerere University is a little bit smarter, better, the best person. And then you disregard someone who is coming from another university. Now that's what we call a halo effect. The halo effect is when someone chooses to look at a positive attribute or a positive aspect in a given human being, and then they attribute all other positive aspects to that very person. In most cases, like we've said, in marketing this is a little bit very taught, that each and every time you appear before people, you have to look good. I have so much been training some of the people in network marketing. In network marketing, one of the biggest responsibilities that you're supposed to have is to have more than 5 suits. You have to look good. You have to look money. You have to look money, because at the end of the day, network marketing is about the money, right? You have to look money. In most cases, you could even fake up a key car, like you have a car, right? People could even borrow cars because they know exactly the meaning of what you call the halo effect. In other words, when the first impression is always the last impression. That's what you call the halo effect. When someone appreciates you in a minute or two, in a bit, they are going to appreciate you and they are going to accord all other positive attributes to your appearance. That's what we call halo effect. It's a bias. Now, how does the brain get into that halo effect? Maybe let me give you another example. One of the specific areas that also has a little bit of accorded what we call the halo effect is what we call lawyers. So most of the lawyers, there are some universities here in Uganda where you're supposed to go in for law and we are supposed to have at least 7 suits. I remember when we were joining university and they wanted to go to a specific university and they were saying, no, you really can't go to university, you can't join that university because you don't have suits. We wanted to do law because we are supposed to most of the times by the time you're growing up, everyone expected to be a law student, right? Because the way lawyers are taught and the way lawyers are nurtured and groomed, there is that kind of experience that they always want to show off, that they always want to, there's that kind of mental image, there's that kind of impression they want to place into your mind just because of their appearance. So halo effect is one of the biases. In other words, that person might be having weaknesses or that environment might not be the best environment, but because you attribute a positive trait, your brain is going to manufacture a lot of other positive traits, most especially when it comes to the interaction that you're going to have with that very person. That is what we call halo effect. It's one of the things that we so much popularize in marketing. Like if you want to be a serious marketer, if you want to be someone that makes a lot of money in marketing, I'll give you an example of network marketing. People are told to appear good, to look good, to blend good, to put on suits and ties, such that you can be like, you can't even check, you trust them at that level. That's how basic human beings are. You trust them at that level because someone has said they have a car key. You don't even want to ask which kind of car are they cruising around. You're not even sure, but because of their appearance, you tend to think that almost each and everything is good in them, right? That's what we call the halo effect. It is the first kind of bias. But how does the brain get there? The brain gets there because it doesn't want to spend a lot of time in thinking. Why? Like I've told you, the role of the brain is to conserve energy. So the easier it gets to the brain to conserve energy, the more the biases come in. So the first effect or the faster bias is what we call the halo effect. How does this operate? It operates by looking or attributing a positive attribute in someone or a positive trait in someone. The moment you see someone behaving good, you think that each and everything in them is good. You may not have time to process and internalize and criticize and assess and analyze. You may not get to that level. But in most cases, people take that, and in most cases, that is the first impression. Now, that is the basis of branding. That is the basis of branding, most especially when it comes to celebrities. That is the basis of branding. That's how branding is developed. That's how, because people want to appear good. And most people get locked up in there, which I will also talk about that. Now, that's the first example of what we call a bias. The brain gets involved into a bias because it doesn't want to do work. Bolabo omuntu noga ono musajja wa mazima, musajja we suuti aba wa mazima, aba wa mazima, musajja we suuti aba wa mazima, oba musajja omukulu aba wa mazima. Nolowooza nti ekyo kibiviiringa oba kiviirayo ddala package. Not forgetting nti oli ku mufere. Aba network marketing bakikola nnyo to ensure that they get the money from the people, and even in marketing in most cases. Why? Because it's a bias. In other words, the brain doesn't want to engage too much. The brain doesn't want to engage at length. It's a little bit easier for you to process information in that very angle. That's what we call halo effect. Let's look at the second type of bias. We're talking about how the brain protects itself from danger. Last time we talked about how the brain protects itself from danger using 4 doors, right? And today we are talking about how the brain protects itself from danger, or how the brain conserves energy using what we call mental biases. And then let's talk about what we call the second bias. Now, the second bias is what we call the confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias is you being in an environment, is what the human brain or the human mind consciously or unconsciously gets involved in by looking for information only that justifies what they believe in at that particular time. Like, for instance, you support Manchester United, right? You don't want to accept that Arsenal has been a better team, right? You don't want to accept that Arsenal has had the best defense, right? You start preparing, you start having a discussion or an argument internally that the Arsenal of 2026 is far worse than the Manchester United of 2012. That's what we call the confirmation bias. In other words, you look for information that only confirms your belief system. You don't look for information that is very contradictory. If you have a belief that you have in you, if you have a little bit of a conviction that you have in you, your brain is going to look for that very information that's going to help you confirm your belief, that's going to help you get more convicted in where you've chosen to place your belief. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but the point is very simple. When I want to confirm I was born and raised a Catholic, each and every time I look for things that believe or that make me comfortable in my religion, right? Even when you tell me anything bad about the Pope, I may not be in position to agree, right? Because that's not who I am. My brain is only going to look for that information that supports my belief system, right? If I get something that supports and confirms, right, or conforms what I believe in, I'm going to be like, yes, I was right. Jesus was born and raised. That's what we call a confirmation bias, right? It's like when you are very certain and you're having an argument with someone, like for instance, I'll use football back in the days, that Arsenal has been a better football team, not only in Premier League, but also in the Champions League, right? But you're a supporter of Manchester United, you support Manchester City, you support Liverpool. You're going to say, Salibata sobola chikolanga jeladi bya chikola mu 2005. Gojukira bwe twagenda mu AC Milan. Ojukira twakba AC Milan mu 2005. Like, you don't want to accept the reality that maybe something is better than this at this particular time. You're confirming and you have confirmed already that what you believe in is the best. So your brain is not going to process information against your belief system. Your brain is going to process information in relation to what you believe in. Like for instance, the moment you choose to see a weakness in someone, only one weakness, no gamba, Jack has this weakness, your brain is going to manufacture a lot of other weaknesses in that very person. Because you want to feel comfortable, right? You want to feed yourself. You want to feed your belief such that this belief can become sustainable. You don't choose to pick up something that is a little bit different. You only pick up something that you think is right, that supports what you believe in as a person. That's what we call confirmation bias, right? Now, this is one of the most dangerous things, because we have it even in politics. In politics, we call it chauvinism. The president of this country has always been talking about chauvinism, that people, there are some leaders that are a little bit chauvinistic, like they have a little bit of a mindset or a belief that they are the best at each and every level. That would be some bit of a confirmation bias, to the extent that they don't want to accept. It's like meeting a hardline believer, like a hardcore, a fanatic into something, right? And then you try to get into an argument with them about what they believe in, right? It is very, very hard. Not so many people are very certain and comfortable to look at this side of the coin and the other side of the coin. Why? Because the other side is very painful. The other side of the coin is very, very painful. So they choose not to look the other side. They choose only to look for information, to look for data, to look for the data and information that supports in what they believe in. And this makes it a little bit very, very hard for them as human beings to progress, for them as human beings to move forward, for them as human beings to get to a direction that they need to get. That's why even when you're planning, this is one of the biggest challenges in developing plans. Now, each and every time the brain processes negative information, you're going to feel so bad, and the brain hates it. The human brain hates painful experiences. Each and every time you choose to go bad about a certain experience, your brain is going to feel so bad about it. So it's going to be like, I don't want that. Now, when we get into planning as human beings, and probably with so much being an organization where we're doing strategic plan 2026, right? Maybe you're coming up with the New Year resolutions. 2026 is my year. Yeah. You're coming up with your New Year resolutions, right? Your brain is only going to confirm or to accept Positive things. I want to have a car, a house, my kids are going to go to such a school, I am going. You know, the moment you say, but what if these don't come true? Your brain doesn't want that feeling. Why? Because the moment you get into that kind of perception, your brain is going to feel uncomfortable. And most of us are not willing to take in that uncomfortable part of our experiences. It's very deadly. It's very nasty. Most of us can't handle. You know what we choose to do? We choose to dwell on the faults. We choose to dwell on the deception. By the way, most of us are being deceived by our own brains. Just because you've had a plan doesn't make it right. Just because you've strategically chosen to think about something. This is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to positive thinking. It's a lie. You know, it doesn't so much happen like that. Because positive thinking means that, yes, you are thinking positively about yourself, even including when you are experiencing the weaknesses as a human being. That's what we call the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you only choose to look for information that supports your perception. Any information that distorts your reality is a little bit considered very detrimental and dangerous. And that's why most of us fail. And the moment you keep on engaging at that level, you're going to have what you call your ego. And your ego is going to become bigger and it's going to become a super ego. In other words, you're going to start distorting all the realities that would be the actual realities. And then you're going to go into what you call the ideal reality. The difference between the reality and the ideal reality, the reality is you don't have the money. The reality is you're weak. The reality is you're extravagant. The reality is you can't save. Those are the realities that are at hand. But the brain is going to be, that's not true. I'm not a good saver. So the moment you get into that level of perception, your brain is engaging into what you call a bias. In other words, because it doesn't want to deal with that specific reality, you're going to have a serious challenge as a human being in your experience. Yeah, our time is up. I want to thank you so much for following. Just in case you want to catch up with the rest of the programs that we've done before, please go subscribe on our YouTube channel, TV1 Uganda, right? And you can be in a position to catch up with the conversations that we started with right away when we started this series in a program called Vision Voice. In Vision Voice, we talk about career growth, professional growth, relationships, work, and all relationships, and how you're supposed to operate confidently as human beings that can get into a given kind of trajectory that can help us a little bit to become successful. So let's catch up next Sunday. It's Dr. Semao Charles Cake, and you've been watching Vision Voice. Let's get back with our Go Green campaign, and then later in the day we shall have Sankofa Square with the Grand Master, Grand Abbot Zulu de West Eta, and then we shall come up with a Fashion Eye, and then we shall also come back with what we call our coffee. So to get a little bit of this, you can subscribe on our YouTube channel, TV1 Uganda, such that you can follow this discussion. Yes, see you next Sunday. Good afternoon.
TV1. See the difference. Don't miss on TV1.
He who controls the printing age and the printed page controls the thinking of the next age and the next generation. Oyo yenna afuga ebiwandikibwa ku bitabo n'ebiwandikibwa ku page mu kaseera ako yafuga endowooza y'omugigi ogunaddako.